morning, everybody. It is indeed a proud privilege and pleasure to stand in front of an August gathering and with the chairpersons on the dais. Like to specifically thank Caho for giving me an opportunity to be present to this important topic. Experiential learnings from accreditations. A good name also to the session called POURRI. I hope at the end of the session we give back some remembrances. Why did I choose this topic? Or rather, when I had a talk with Caho and they said, can we have this? Is probably because I have had humbly say that experiences of having gone through NABH, I would say my first passion. And then I got into Dubai, where I took care of the Aster DM group, both India and international, had the privilege to go ahead with JCI and completed about 10 or more accreditations. Further than that, we said, let's look at the learnings, and therefore, at about 6 of my hospitals went in for Canadian. Thought of going into Australian and had the proud privilege to be on the board for the technical committee. With a little bit of an experience, a little bit, I would say, trivial experience, I'd like to present to you what is it that we learned from each one of them. At the end of this, I'm sure the question that will arise is, which one would you choose? I have no answer, and that rests with you after I tell you what each one of them has taught me. Each one have given credibility, validity on what you look at from a patient's perspective. So let me try putting forth these views. So when we look at accreditation programs, the first thing that comes from the eyes and mind of an assessor, what do they have to see? And the first thing is, we all talk about criteria. Is it different when you look at NABH, when you look at JCI, any one of them? All of them spell out what is called as a criteria, which is a basic, compulsory, which is there in every one of them. The second very, very important aspect of it is what do they call as mandated. Every one of the accreditations actually talks about mandated, and it is across all of them. A very, very third important part of it is it has become the need of the hour. Look at from a patient's perspective. When we started the journey of quality several years back, we looked at a lot of it from a management perspective. And when I go through the series of presentations that I've seen from yesterday till the last, it has been, is it patient-centric? Friends, yes, all the accreditations have now moved, and they talk about, are you patient-centric? Does the patient feel that you have quality systems? So it's become extremely, very, very important. And the last but not the least is a very, very important aspect that you have also come out with, where we look at very, very important aspect of analysis. Are you sustainable? Are you continuing with the practice? How accurate are you? And can you say that you have improved your services following the accreditation? All of these is what every assessor looks for and every accreditation offers. Having said that, the next very important is the principles. It's very, very known. It is probably what is in the minds, and every one of you have gone through this since you are there in the conferences. Even if you wake up at night, the first thing that all of you will talk about these principles: safe, equitable, efficient, timely, effective, and patient-centric. These are the dimensions. Every accreditation looks at these dimensions. Having said that, I'm going to just quickly talk to you about two parts of any accreditation. The first one, everybody says top down. And all the leaders who are here have spoken about it. Is your leader involved? Accreditation insists that the leaders ought to be a part and parcel. And when you start your accreditation, it starts with the leader deciding, yes, this is the accreditation we would like to go for. Having said that, what does the organization then look for? Efficiency. Operational efficiency in every form, cost effectiveness, you name it. Every one of them comes as a part and parcel. Now, I'm going to talk to you on something which is very, very important: the eye for detail, eye for best practices, and leadership involvement. This is common to all of them. having gone through a multitude, probably about 60 to 70 accreditations now, I've realized every one of them has one common factor: global standardization. I would never like to say that one is better than the other and things like that. No. You will find that they are globally standardized and very, very important for every one of them, using the time wisely and preparing for it from the very beginning is a common factor. This is a very, very interesting slide. This is where a little bit of the differences begin. And that what is very important is the era of digitization. And I'm so happy that over the last 2 days, there was so much that was talked about digitization. Friends, we have moved into the era of digitization, and this now has to be a part of our accreditation process in some way or the other. The question that is generally asked is that it is tough, it is difficult to implement. Yes, it's a part and parcel. Some form of digitization has become the need of the hour. And that is not only in the organization looking at digitization and continuity of care, but it is also important for the assessors to move into the era of digitization. The first experience, I would say, which was different from the rest, was when I went for the recent JCI accreditation of one of my hospital, when what was used was a Holocaust lens. The beauty of this was the assessor was wearing this lens, and whatever he was seeing here was relayed back in Chicago, and they knew exactly what the assessor is looking at. Therefore, it was a very unique experience because he would show his hands right at one particular facility, and it was relayed straight to them to say, this is what I see, which means there was some amount of credibility being brought in with the assessment techniques. It might be expensive, it might take some time, but India is in no way far behind the digital technology. We are going ahead in leaps and bounds. This is an excellent methodology which will prevent people from looking at assessors with a biased view and saying that maybe I was not assessed correctly. As I want to be very clear, it could be a maybe. Therefore, this type of a technique, when it was used, we were asked permission. You can imagine the credibility. We were asked, will you allow us to use this technique? And we said, yes, it's fine. What you see is what is the headquarters looking at. And that brought us to learn how to use this technology, breakout rooms, and so on and so forth. Therefore, friends, it brings us to the people focus. Accreditation is all about this very, very important evolution. And as I also mentioned to you, all of these like initiation, implementation, CQI, future plan is fine. But the next very important is to go ahead with the digitization, which is important. Data is common. I won't like to stress on that at this point in time, but this is something which was very interesting, and I was reading. We all talk about quality assurance. Is quality assurance the end all of accreditation? And that brought me to the first question. When I looked at quality assurance, what does that basically mean? And the first one that came was certainty by the compliance. That's all is quality assurance. Everybody looks at, you have your standards and you say you comply. And you say that that is quality assurance. Fair enough. Which brought me to the next one. Sometimes in every one of our hospitals, including mine, there are non-compliances. And then the mindset that comes in saying is, probably these are not all that important. Can we just forget about these processes? Can come in to all of us. And therefore, it brings us to a very, very important question. Is it weakening the system? By my deciding that these are the processes a little weak, may not be very important. Question that can come at the back of the mind, that becomes quality assurance. But the moment you bring that, very, very important, I may stop assessing it totally. And that becomes a concern. Can happen. Is quality assurance the end all? Where do we move next? And therefore, I like to bring up a very, very important action, and that is quality improvement. And I'm so happy from yesterday, we have been talking all the time of quality improvement. Therefore, friends, every organization has to look at one and only one, move from quality assurance into CQI. And that becomes very important, non punitive, recognize it, measure it, analyze it, monitor it, and that becomes probably what we call as excellence. So, the whole cycle, as you all can see, we have slowly moved from a quality assurance, accreditation, CQI, to excellence. And that's what the patient is looking for, and that is what I call. I'm not going into the depth because I have ST members in here who are going to speak on cost benefit. Let me give that wonderful thing to hear from them. Therefore, at the end of it, when we talk about learnings from accreditation, what are the winning things? Did the organization achieve? And the first one is organizational responsibility. That's what accreditation is all about. The organization takes the responsibility of saying, what I speak or what I talk, I walk. That credibility goes back to the patient, and that's the first thing. The second thing, what does happen at this particular time, and the organization achieves responsibility to the community comes with it. The second very key success factor, you become efficient, and finally, you adopt the state standards. Accreditation, win solution is all these four important aspects, and therefore, it brings us to the key messages. Before I start comparing each one of them, let me look at what are the key messages that you get from here. So, the four important things, therefore, the challenges that are there has to be understood. Cultural diversity. I had this wonderful opportunity of working in different countries, and I found that the standards sometimes do not help you. I had a tough time when I did when I did it in the UAE, and when I moved to Oman, it was totally different. You would not believe that when I had to have a mock audit for a code blue, I had to decide between a male and a female rendering the services for a CPR. And they said, that's tough. You will have to ensure that your code blue has equal number of males and females. So you can imagine the number of people who are in the code blue. And first I used to say, it's very unusual that when I announce in any of your hospitals, you are clear, you announce the patient bed, where it is. Here I had to say male. So the male team will have to run. There's a lot of cultural diversity. I moved on to do the Sipahi, which is in Saudi. And when I went to Saudi, it was totally different. They said, you need to tell us what is the nationality of the person who has undergone a code blue. I said, my God, I never knew we made a distinct, because when he dies as a human being. But cultural diversity should be taken into account when we also look at standards, which never occurred when I had it much earlier here. And of course, the next very important will be a very important is clinical governance that you have all already known about. Therefore, before I go to the last slides, which will be comparisons, what is the ecosystem going to look at each one of them? Every one of them will look at, do you have an end-to-end process? From the time the patient comes in, patient leaves, that is not the end. Do you have a process that looks at what happens to this person after he has left it? He still is your patient. And with the pandemic, it has become all the more essential because we still feel chronic patients or those who have a refill of medicines really don't have to visit the hospitals anymore for their own safety. Do you have a solution? That's what is end-to-end process, and they ought to be accredited. So home care becomes a part of your accreditation process. A very important aspect is sustainability of the process. Those accreditation programs which look at sustainability, friends, are actually quality-driven accreditations. They need to question you, is your process sustainable? Not only repeatable. Repetitive processes are fine, or are they sustainable becomes important, and the organizational health becomes a part and parcel, and that is satisfaction. That means safety, that means growth, that also means risk mitigation. An important topic that has been repeatedly come up from yesterday I see is risk mitigation. Like the other committees, some of the accreditation standards insist and start with the risk committee rather than any of the other committees because it's
Malti, can you finish in a minute, please?
Yeah, I should. And finally, I will now come to the last three slides. Let me look at what do we have, which is what is something very close to the heart of every one of us, including myself. And then you will see here the correlation between all the points that I had talked to you about, which we look at this point in time, which is extremely important. This is what comes out of when you look at NABH. Conforms to all the points that I raised now so far, where it is a focus on CQI, the need of the hour, and the way the entire surveillance process has been taken up. The next very important highlight that I'd like to bring out at this point is the JCI. What does it have to highlight which is similar and yet a little different from it? And there you have an important aspect that comes out of it. I'm sorry again. And that is 6 months to 1 year look is good, but they bring in innovation. This is what I said is probably they'll go a little ahead. The technique is different. They do a tracer, which is good to go ahead with because that's how the patient actually looks at you. That is end-to-end process, which helps you when you go in for a JCI. And very beautiful is what they have is a guide. So you find it very easy to go through because they guide you step by step how your surveillance is going to be. They have an excellent scorecard. Some of the highlights, always good to learn from. The next one that I have to look at this point in time, I'm sorry, is where I would look at the last one, which is important for you. Okay. The ACHSI standard, wonderful again. We have 2 hospitals which have gone in, and very important is Canadian. I enjoyed this accreditation because it is totally patient, patient, patient. They do not look at anything. They don't look at any back period, no 6 months, no 1 year. It is just as is process. What is it that you tell your patients? And every patient is interviewed, and you don't get to be there when a patient is interviewed. Every staff is interviewed on their own, which was very, very unique experience for me. Good to learn one from the other. And this was one of those which I found was very emphasizing only on patient focus. They do not look at anything else. Since we are talking about patient centricity, this is an accreditation which talks only to the patient. Whatever you might say, they will say, great, fine, that's wonderful what you're doing. They talk to the doctors, talk to the nurses, but they will say that's very fine. Let me see what the patient has to say. And therefore, my last one, which I'd like to go, another very interesting one, which is similar to the others. But what is important is attaining the safety, but let us focus on PREM. The need of the hour is patient response. How do they believe you is what is important. And that's what I would end by saying. Every accreditation, we have to give a lot of focus, only what patient has to say. And I'd end, and I promise to end with this slide, which is good to see finally what the patient has to say. That's what the patient says. Says, all is fine. I have my own checklist because I have worked in the aviation industry. I'll give you the checklist and I'll tell you how your hospital is functioning. That has become the need of the hour because patients believe now in participative decision making. They need to be a part of every decision that you take. That is what needs to be audited. And that's what the patient has to say at the end. And thank you very much, because I know the next slide is a thank you slide, even if it doesn't move. Thank you. Thank you very much.